Hello everybody. Hello everybody. I'm Matt Gibbs and I've been given the task of warming you up with a little housekeeping, but before that just thank you. Thank you for coming, thank you for volunteering, thank you for speaking. Please excuse the notes, I'm obliged to communicate every word. At the back we have a variety of delicious refreshments all day. The terrace is yours to access, hope you enjoy the view. And should you need to take an important call or reply to a key email, the shared spaces of the Oval are at your disposal, and we also have Executive Box 43 for those phone calls or emails where complete privacy is required. You can get out via the terrace, straight up, white door, it's signpost to Box 43. The conveniences are down the hall, and there's no fire drill today, so if you do hear an alarm, please walk calmly, use the stairs, nearest safe exit, and only inflate your life jacket when you leave the building. We need to say a huge thank you to our sponsors for their continued support, and a special thank you to Pete Wills of Snap Surveys, who after serving the ASC for decades has decided to step down as chair after some 12 years in that role. And I think we can all agree that nobody on the planet could have done a better job than Pete, so thank you, Pete. Yeah, and we're actually grateful to Pete because he's remaining on the committee as treasurer for the foreseeable, because we also need to say a big thank you to Raz Khan, who stepped down after several years volunteering in that role. And we'll miss Raz, especially his insightful and above all calming guidance during ASC committee meetings. Thanks, Raz. We welcome Monica Kerr of Panel Base to the ASC committee, already hitting the ground running with all things conference, and there's so much going on. New initiatives like our triple 30 tickets, only £30 for younger people, and our first ever live stream plus recordings, don't look at the camera. We're breaking down those geo barriers to knowledge share, and it is so important, especially as, globally, our sector provides a voice for millions of people every single day at the decision-making tables of governments, corporations, charities, all the way around the world. We are collectively nothing short of an integral component of Western democratic society. So, if you know of anyone who is looking for true purpose in their professional career, why not nudge them to our sector, and indeed, everybody's welcome at the ASC. On that note, please, I'd like you to join me in giving a warm welcome to the president of Delineate, one of the fastest growing companies in the UK, and who are sponsoring the drinks later, so all power to them. He is the mastermind of Insights Assemble, the ASC committee member, and your host for today. Please put your hands together for JT.
Wow, thank you very much, Matt. Good morning, everybody, here present at the Oval and also streaming online. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. I am going to go through a few little housekeeping bits and pieces for today, but from my perspective, welcome to the ASC conference. It's amazing to see you all here. Apologies for badgering you with messages on LinkedIn, emails, etc., and I very much appreciate you coming today. A few pieces of housekeeping. If you would like to tweet along or post on LinkedIn, here is the hashtag ASCorg. Please do so. Please comment on presentations and if you like them, and if you've got any comments or questions as well. And if you need the Wi-Fi, you may already know it, but here is the Wi-Fi network here and password for the venue. QR codes will feature throughout the day. So I was told earlier that someone didn't know how to use a QR code. I learnt myself recently. If you haven't used a QR code before, please open your camera discreetly in the room and point it at the QR code on screen, and it will take you to a link for one of our sponsors or their homepage or any of the information shown on screen. Feel free to take a picture, and it should work on streaming as well. So QR codes throughout the day. And on that note, we would like you to complete a survey at the end of the day, whether you're watching online or here today, to give us feedback for future events. So please do take the time to do that. We all love surveys, clearly, being here today. Okay, final point. We are live streaming today. It will be stored as a recording later, so please be mindful of getting up in the venue today and try to be clear of the cameras. Feel free to leave if you need to, of course, but please take calls and put your phones on silent now, if you could. Please. Thank you. Breaks, more importantly. We have a number of breaks throughout the day. There's plenty of time for networking. Our first break will be at 11 o'clock for a good solid half an hour. Teas and coffees and something sweet to eat as well. A full lunch at 1 p.m. Thank you for the dietary requirements. They've all been taken on board. 3:30, more tea and more cake, I expect. And then at 5 o'clock, we'll be wrapping up for drinks at the bar around the corner here. Okay, so today I would love for you to participate. We've got an opportunity to ask questions. Keep them to yourself until the break. At the end of each session, we'll be roving mic around the room. If you're online, please comment on the YouTube stream, and one of the team will pick that up and pass that to Matt, who just left the lectern just now, and we will ask those of the presenters. 20 minutes for each of the presentations, short and sharp, hopefully engaging, 10 minutes for questions at the end. Please do ask. We really appreciate having questions, and all the presenters are prepared for difficult, knotty questions. I'm looking at you, Jane. Sorry about that. Okay, so without further ado, and a couple of minutes ahead of schedule, we are going to be bringing our first presenter to the stage, or to the lectern. Jane Frost, CBE, is the current CEO of the MRS, which is almost 11 years, I think, Jane. Jane started her career at Unilever, which I believe one of our other presenters did as well. Has held senior roles at the BBC, HM Revenue and Customs, latterly at the MRS and various other organisations. I'm really, really excited to have Jane here today. She's going to be talking through some of the latest research from the MRS. I won't steal her thunder at all. Without further ado, please welcome Jane Frost to the stage.
Thank you. So I'm going to do what my boss, John Burt, always told me never to do, which is start with an apology. I can't turn my neck very well, so I'm going to have to do sort of that when I'm checking things. So the comic bit is unintentional. I also tend to wander about a bit during presentations, but I'm a bit stuck to the lectern here. So my due apologies to anyone remotely who I suddenly disappear off stream with. My very first chair in Unilever was a nightmare to light in these sort of things because he used to rove around and grab people. And if you think that we were trying to sell soap powder to the great unwashed, the worst thing was all he wanted to do was kill the opposition, kill Procter. And sitting next to me was the J. Walter Thompson chairman, who, very laid back. I'm in advertising, nothing phases me, too sophisticated to understand my own advertising. And by the time my chairman finished, this guy was up and behind me going, kill Procter, kill Procter, kill Procter. Now, I haven't learnt those skills, I'm afraid, so this is going to be slightly more genteel. And I'm not going to give you a why you should join MRS, because that's obvious, we're brilliant. We support the ASC, we support all of the other organisations involved. But what I am going to make a pitch for before I start is if any of you have not filled in, because you should, you're in the business, the inclusion census, the survey of inclusion in the research sector, please do so. It is available for everyone to fill in. It only takes 10 minutes. I have been told it's a good survey. Thank you, Paul. I would be delighted to have you all participate, because the more people who do, the realer it is, and the more we can decide what we need to do in the inclusion agenda. So, emergency water is now needed, which is this one. Thank you. Lovely, thank you for the emergency. So, Insight Alchemy. You know that frequently I always find that when I go to these conferences, not just your conferences, any research conference, people are deep, and quite rightly, in the bowels of methodology. This is not how we sell things to people, and we need to sell the research sector more than ever. We are in the middle of a talent crisis. We are in the middle of a squeeze on margins, not just because of inflation, but of pay inflation as well. So I want to talk to you about something that we think, based on talking to CEOs and to our senior client counsel, may be the way forward. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the sort of thing that our end clients are talking about. So we do have a lot of opportunities, and we may think of these in terms of threats, but I think they're opportunities. We do live in very liquid times. Things change and are moving fast, and there is a demand for flexibility and responsiveness. And these are not things that mass internal data sets give you. So there are opportunities in everything that I'm saying for the survey business, for all of the businesses. There is a huge raise in the demand for the answering the question why. And that is not just at a commercial level. This is actually going through people you would have thought were just using their own in-house data. But most importantly, it's coming from the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, who are looking at how they can improve the inclusion and representation of less represented groups in official statistics. And they've come to the conclusion that it's about the lived experience and the why, and that's how you're going to get there. Our clients, certainly those on the Senior Client Council, are increasingly sophisticated, and they will respond to challenge. They have an access to the boardroom that is unprecedented. 10 years ago, everyone was saying to me, how do we get to the boardroom? Ladies and gentlemen, your clients are at the boardroom at the moment, and you can thank COVID, largely. People have been terrified of COVID and the attitudes and changes that they're not predicting. So they're going to desperately want to be reassured. And now, of course, it's the cost of living crisis. Number of briefs coming through on the cost of living crisis is phenomenal at the moment. And we do have a disruption of data sets. So there's a chance to get in to people whose sort of data sets were very closed and they used their own ways of doing things. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, but we've just got to be proactive and go and get it. Doesn't mean that there aren't threats, because the threats come from data coming from places we never looked for it before. You know, the music streaming service that's suddenly discovered they've got data. There is still, and I'm not sure we ever know how to get rid of this fool's gold idea of certainly social media and stuff like that, which it's got lots of new lovely jargon, and marketing directors love the new lovely jargon. And we do have to be prepared to counter it and actually be quite robust in countering it. And mostly, I think, in the past we've been apologetic rather than constructive about this. We do have a carryover of assumptions about the problems of self-reporting. Again, I think we can be robust in talking about those. We do know that there is a problem of not having enough trained, qualified people to support clients in a constructive way. And I mean in this, the sort of stuff that Bex, who is here, is doing on representation in research, that is improving the quality of the delivery you give to clients. But it's not going to be easy, and it's certainly not going to be a walkover. And I think we in general still lack self-confidence. I would much rather see more of you doing my sort of bounce at people and say, listen, because that's the way you're going to grab attention. And we need to do this collectively. We need to stop being the sort of zitty throwing pebbles in the pond, and we need to be hauling the bloody bring rocks at people. And very recently I had a conversation with the Minister for Trade, a certain Mr. Rowley, and told him we were one of the success stories of Britain, and he should be supporting us because we export 30% of our revenue. We are the biggest source of research in Europe, and we're the second biggest country in the world. We have a right to be confident, and we will do what we can in supporting you on government policy to make sure it stays that way. So I would say, and I've used a quote from me, because if you can't blow your own trumpet, why not? That, again, coming back to the fact that we used to talk molecular when we talk to people, people now want collaboration. They want things that are in formulae rather than individual ingredients. And combining stuff is one of the main obsessions of our major clients. People like Elaine Rodrigo at Reckitt, Naomi Kozlowski at Tesco, Unilever. This importance of combination is the thing that is driving them most of their work, to be honest. And I think within those molecular structures, those big new elements that we're going to find, we need to be driving this power of why. And you'll see from a few of the comments that I've got coming up forward that that's really what people are looking for. A few years ago, I was talking to an agency called Karma Armour, an ad agency, who were very dismissive. You know, if you couldn't pick the answer up of Google, then it didn't exist. And I said, do you find that's a differentiator with your clients? And they said, well, actually, no. But the power of why is the differentiator, and that's where the insights come from. So when we went out with the Delphi project on the Insight Alchemist, we talked very widely across a number of categories about what was going to be important. And I think that when you get people like Pinterest, who used to just go and sell the power of their own data, saying that they really need to combine it with external data, we're starting to see the start of that revolution. And that's things, feel free to use all these quotes for whatever you're doing, but this is part of why I think the opportunity exists. And equally, Spotify, who came to me a few years ago and said, I don't need any of the stuff that you guys sell because, God, I've got my own. They are now saying to us that if we don't have external behavioural data with their own data, they don't think that they are doing it right. But equally, this is about them having a competitive advantage. So you going in with some amazing stuff that combines with the stuff that they've got, that's where they're going to get their next budget from. Their next budget doesn't come from just analysing my own data better. It comes from the magic that is created when you bring external in and do that combination. And even Alec Owens is really powerful when you talk to him, and he's the head of the People Data Centre in Unilever, which is a fantastic initiative, and I do urge you to go and study it. But he is really absolutely keen on the fact that just his data alone, his vast amounts of whatever you measure data in these days, is not going to be enough. And he's really robust on the fact that it has limitations too. So we need to find these people, we need to use their support, and we need to take on a little bit of their confidence. And we need to actually champion what we can do well, which is actually do the why with the power of flexibility and responsiveness. Again, those big data sets, many of which, as I said, have been broken over the COVID period, are still very lumpy, and they are not very tractable. But what we do, what you guys do, is all of those. So it is a special ingredient, and it is what is wanted. As Naomi says, COVID taught them they're more likely to be wrong than right. And that means they do more research to try and mitigate for that. And what they really do a lot of the time now is head for test and learn. So they throw something in the market, they test it, it comes out, if it doesn't work. And this is one of her key KPIs when dealing with the boardroom, is how fast she can get things into test and learn. So actually, survey data is just absolutely gold dust for this sort of thing. And we ought to be celebrating that, how we can do this, proving how collectively we can do this, so that they don't go and find somebody else who can do it from some more fool's gold bit of data generation. And we need to, I think, be very aggressive in challenging assumptions. Traditionally, we say, oh, it doesn't work because people think this. Well, we need to go out and beat people up and beat assumptions out of people. And we need to own some of the problems. The problems with self-report are there, but so are the problems with in-house data sets. So are the problems with any other methodology. And we just have to be very, very open and know what the problems are along and know how it works. And Alex says to me, own the bias, because everything else has bias. Don't be afraid of it. Manage it, and it will generate something for you that you feel that you can rely on. And I had to put this in. There are bad reports. There are bad samples. And we don't need to sort of own those. What we need to own is the best. And there is lots of guidance out there on how you can be the best. And there are MRS guidance, and there is now a new set of guidance coming out on how you deal with underrepresented markets. That data, that exists. We need to train our staff to be critical about the way they do things and to be actually owning the quality of what they deliver. Because a lot rides on this these days, a lot more than it used to, probably pre-COVID. Just got to see the amount of money the government is still putting in to research because they're not sure of what they're doing. Well, they're not sure about what they're doing anyway, but there you are. And I know I've used the word alchemy, and you guys here being the guys from computing and science and maths and everyone else may be telling me that what you think when I think alchemy is the medieval magician who works for Queen Elizabeth and is a bit of a charlatan. But actually, if you look up the modern alchemy, they're defining this as fusion, the results of nuclear fusion, creating completely new molecules that we've never invented before. So I think modern alchemy when I think alchemy, and I think that it also has the benefit of being something that actually is a combination of things and represents something which is a change agent in itself. So, in summary, what I'm urging you to do is help each other, because I think this is collaborative, tell a great story, celebrate the why and the flexibility of what you can do, think about the culture and context of how you are doing it, and if you read the Delphi report, which I urge you to do, there's a really good piece on changing culture in there and what we think we need to do. Really celebrate the test and learn, which is something that is almost unique. Help clients integrate. I know a lot of people are now experiencing a demand for cooperation on projects, and we certainly are seeing a demand that we all cooperate on things like inclusion and sustainability. But we do need to stop having a resistance to this and make it work for us. Again, I know it's easier said than done, but there are some hints in the Insight Alchemist about how you do it. Please, let's get back to training our staff. Let's get back to ensuring they can be the best they can be. And let's have a campaign for great survey design. I mean, I'm happy to support that, and we always do talk about it. Sampling is part of it, a modern approach to sampling. And it really isn't good enough these days when we are challenged by clients to say, what does NatRep mean, when we go, oh, we weight something. Because increasingly the Senior Client Council is going out and campaigning on that too. So you are going to, we hope, start to see more intelligent clients who are going to say, what do you mean by that? So a great survey design is something that we should always be hoping for the best of. So that's the report. We have another piece of work on talent and the workplace, which basically, unfortunately, concludes that most of our staff feel that they're underpaid, overworked, and why the bloody well are they here? It's not much different from what the ad agencies still think. But actually, if you combine some of these together, you can see a route through which demands of us creativity, innovation, and yes, a little bit of risk. But I think this is the time to take it. Maybe 10 years ago wasn't, but this is the time to take it. So please go and look at that. Please fill in the survey on inclusion. I'm happy to take a couple of questions if there's any time. I'm not happy to take any eggs, so could you put those down if you brought those? Hello.
Here you go. Hi. You. Hi, Peter Jacklin.
Hi, Peter.
Hello, Jane. The do gap, as it were, reminds me about the issue of political opinion polling. One of the most high-profile aspects of the business that we're in terms of both the public perception and business perception. And it becomes important, of course, when decisions such as which political party is going to get in is very almost too close to call. Is there anything that's done in research that is parallel to that for business as opposed to political opinion polls? And is there anything that we can learn from the investigations that the opinion polling companies did about the difference between prediction and actual action, what you say and what you do?
It's a great question, because we never really want to get into the sort of helpless spirals the polls get into. You know, over 2 investigations, the first big investigation that MRS sat on, a lot of action was taken, and unfortunately the action that was taken drove adverse results in the next set of polls, and we all ended up in front of the House of Lords Select Committee, which is not something I would recommend for you. There isn't. We've just done some work looking at how much of the press relies on research, including polling, for content, and it's about 20%, even in the time of the Ukrainian crisis. So despite the fact that they've got things to fill themselves, their papers up with, 20% is based on research, and about 2% of that is opinion polling for elections mainly. I have to say, Daily Mail, funny enough, doesn't rely on polls. It relies on experts, would you believe? And experts said, and therefore it must be true. I think we learn to avoid the mistakes of the polls, and we need to actually keep telling people that the polls are only a small bit of the business. We don't see anything else that is that public critical, that tends to end up in the newspapers. I do think that a lot of the big polling companies obviously have integrated management systems, and they do learn from the process going forward. And I never have a conversation with Bennett Ipsos when we're not having polls on this hand and something else on that hand. So I don't think it's as separate as you think it is, although we always like to tell their lordships that it really is a very small bit of the business, and therefore they shouldn't tar us with all the same brush. Last time round, and certainly the last set of elections in France, they were very accurate. Next time round it'll be awful. I do actually live for not having the phone ring on polls and accuracy. But we do try to challenge some of them, because some of the polls are very inaccurate. And what we do ask is that when challenged, we say we need to educate the journos. So we do have a scheme with journalistic colleges teaching journalists how to read polls. And you know, here are your 3 which will indicate that this is a very iffy poll. So we do work consistently with journo colleges on that. Lovely. Well, look, you may always email me. Please don't do it in capitals, because I'll then feel offended and think you're shouting at me. But I will always answer. It's been a great privilege to be here with you. I hope you have a very good day. I know you will, from who's coming next and all the people. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Jane, thanks very much for that. Good opportunity to nip to the back if anyone needs to. That was awesome, thank you. Some really interesting quotes from the Delphi report. I love the quote from Alex Owens about all data has biases. I've seen in my client work how we fuse survey data with external data continuously now, and clients want control of that. And even the big data companies that would have their own first-party data, phrases we should be more familiar with in the survey world, you need the why answering. And survey data continues to have a massive role to play, even with businesses that have so much data of their own at their fingertips. We have now an industry legend. I'll make him blush in a moment. A man who's always got a quote. Paul Edwards, who is here today to talk about survey research, a history and a future. Paul is often dubbed the ex-ad man, who's worked at Lowe and BBH, but more in our world has run TNSRI and Hall & Partners in Europe, and is a great support to many people in the industry. Paul, welcome. The stage is yours.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk about history, and I think my main qualification is extreme old age, so bear with me and try and stay awake. It's kind of, I like being here, and because my very first brush with applied statistics was as the assistant scorer for the school first 11 cricket team. So it stood me in great stead. And believe it or not, this is the 1946 Ashes Down Under, but that book that they're using is exactly the same book when I was at school. I'm not that old. Anybody who likes cricket, they'll see that Sid Barnes and Don Bradman both got 200. Australia got 690 for 8 declared, and they gave a pasting to the Brits. Nothing has changed over all these years. The rest will be on topic, so don't worry. When you're talking about history, you've got to have a sense that, Julius Caesar said history is written by the victors, and so you have to be aware that everybody has an agenda. And Paul Feldwick, in his absolutely brilliant book about advertising, couldn't recommend it more highly, says there are 3 narratives about history and perspective. And he says the first one is the Enlightenment narrative. The past was primitive. Now we are enlightened. Everything new is good. And he says there's also the Golden Age narrative. The best years are all in the past. Look at the great work we used to do, and it's so much more difficult now. We could never do things like that these days. And then there's the year zero narrative. The world has changed. None of the old rules apply. Technology has changed everything. Consumers themselves have changed. So all that just by way of saying, I'm going to try and steer away somehow between those things and try not to fall into too many traps. And I'm always very suspicious of everything changing. Jeff Bezos famously says, don't tell me what's changing, tell me what's not changing. And I think there's a lot of profit in not changing. So here we go. First survey I could find. This is a rare colour photo of the couple, because mostly it was black and white in those days. All we know about when it was is that Augustus Caesar decreed the... I know it was a census, not a survey, but bear with me. It was somewhere between 27 BC and 14 AD, because that's when Augustus was around. So that's the first evidence I could find of a tax survey. Then 1,000 years ahead of that, we have another survey, the Great Survey of England, done by William the Conqueror to find out who lived here, how much they owned, and what you could extract from them. So tax was a very common theme in the early days of the survey. Ripple forward another nearly 1,000 years, and we begin... They're enjoying themselves far more than you are. Why aren't you all cheering? We get to the sort of survey that we would begin to recognise. You've got social reformers... So, yeah, come on. Social reformers like Rowntree and Booth going out and finding out what really is happening in the poor population, because mostly nobody knew what was happening there. And there's a wonderful quote. It said, when these social surveys were published, they not only shocked the British public but changed popular opinion on the causes of poverty. And that's the sort of thing that surveys do. Social research is important then, it's important now. And I think that set up, the work that these guys did set up our 2 traditions, which is to understand and to measure. And I think we're still doing those 2 things. So, again, creeping forward a little bit this time, we have the first tradition really, I guess, is the qualitative side. You've got Ernst Dichter, all the post-Freudians, and I'm not going to talk about that because that's probably not what surveys do. But the work that mass observation did, which is in that tradition to some extent, I think is relevant to us. And this was, 3 chaps started mass observation in 1937. One of them was an anthropologist and an ornithologist. One of them was a painter and a filmmaker, and one of them was a poet and a Daily Mirror journalist. Imagine saying that these days, a poet and a Daily Mirror journalist. Oxymoron defined. So 1937, they were creating an anthropology of ourselves. And what they did, they recruited a team of observers who just went into pubs, they went to football matches, they watched what was going on and they wrote it down. And they also recruited a panel of volunteer writers who kept diaries about what was happening in their lives. And that was it. They were studying the lives of ordinary people using observation and diary techniques. It's fabulous. And that was still going on in the 1950s. If these 2 books are fabulous. Nella Last's diary. She was a mass observation panelist during the Second World War and shortly afterwards. 2 volumes of her diaries are available. If you don't read, because I know people don't, ITV condensed it into 90 minutes of brilliant drama with the wonderful Victoria Wood in a serious role. It's not a comedy. But just reading those books, watching that, will give you a real flavour of what mass observation achieved. Okay, that's enough about that side. So the other tradition, the quant side. we're back to elections, Jane. 1936, Alf Landon was running against Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Who's heard of Alf Landon? Nobody, but he lived to be 100, incredibly. Anyway, totally irrelevant. During the 1936 election, they had polling problems then, and a magazine called the Literary Digest sent out, and I'm going to use the word literally because I mean it, not because it's a foible of speech. They sent out literally millions of ballots to Americans to say how you're going to vote. And the editors predicted with great confidence that Alf Landon would win by an absolute landslide in 1936. Now, the pollsters, personified by chaps like George Gallup, said, no, we're going to use much smaller samples, we're going to be much more representative about who we talk to and ask their opinion. And of course, they predicted exactly the opposite, that Roosevelt would win by a landslide. And Gallup more or less went out saying, I guarantee this is going to happen. And he said what we would all recognise. He said, mathematics shows that we should be right within 3% 95 times out of 100. And of course, history proved him correct. I've been allowed to give a quick commercial break in the middle of all this for the Archive of Market and Social Research. And it is kind of relevant because it's about history. The AMSR is a charity which is collecting stuff, if I may use your word, stuff about our industry. And it's books, it's reports, it's articles, it's periodicals. And they're bringing them together into an online archive, which is free to search. So it's all available there. They are open for donations of money, of time, if you want to volunteer, or of things. If you've got old things that you think might just get thrown out, the archive would love to have them. I'm not doing any more selling other than that. If you go into it, you will find there's a publication called, and I'm sure Jane's very familiar with this, The Making of an Industry, the Market Research Society, 1946 to 1986, A History of Growing Achievement. Now, it's a very punchy title, I admit. God bless Ian Brace. But if you are in any way interested in the nonsense I'm talking about, Chapter 1, you only have to read Chapter 1, gives you all of this kind of stuff at great place. And the other thing is, this archive has got masses of statistics, and I'm only going to give you one. In 1969, 49% of us smoked. In 2018, 14% of us smoked. And yeah, so what interesting, isn't it? But, you know, if we look at the obesity crisis and we see the number of people who are obese, we think, Christ, we're never going to sort it. We're never going to solve that. But actually, we solved the smoking crisis, as it might have been called in 1969. So, you know, the data in here, the things, they do give you hope that things can change, social change can happen. Back to Rowntree and Booth. Okay. Right, back to the beginning of this tradition again. So I've moved out of the commercial break. We're back in the narrative. A lovely lady called Sylvia Ashby, who ran a market research company in Australia, gave this quote to the Sydney Morning Herald, 1938. What is this market research? And she said, 1938, market research is the science of interviewing the public to find out why they buy certain goods. It gives housewives the opportunity to record complaints and make suggestions, and from the manufacturer's angle, it's a means of overcoming strong competition by studying the consumer and giving him what he wants. I know you're not allowed to say housewife and things like that anymore, but it's very simple, and it's kind of why we still do surveys. I think it's all there. It's charmingly old-fashioned, but it kind of sums it up. And as Jane has pointed out, we have always had our critics, and many of them come from the advertising industry, where I've spent many years. And David Ogilvy, the doyen of advertising, famously said, the trouble with research is people don't do what they say what they think, and they don't think how they feel. And, you know, who can say that's otherwise? The nearest analogy, I think, of the polling of people that do say gap is probably in innovation research. When you ask people, will you use this? I think that's the big gap. Irrelevant. I'll move on. So David Ogilvy, however, also said, advertising people who ignore research are as dangerous as generals who ignore decodes of enemy signals. So he wasn't quite as anti-research as he might have led us to believe. And all that this really proves is Scott Fitzgerald was right when he said, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. So, you know, we've all had very skewy views of market research and surveys in the past. Which brings me to the walrus. In the Horniman's Museum is this walrus, and it was stuffed in the 19th century by a taxidermist, and this taxidermist had never seen a walrus in real life. And so all the folds and the sags and everything that makes a walrus disappeared because he stuffed it to death, as it were. He absolutely felt it. And so it doesn't look a bit like a real walrus. And that for me, is the metaphor for survey research. If if you working blind, if you don't know what the audience is like, if you don't know what's happening in the world, you're going to end up with a Horniman's walrus. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. I know you're all in survey research, but for me, this is the metaphor, because we, clients, politicians, do not live in the real world. We've got to go into the real world and find out what is happening so we don't overstuff our walruses. I think you get the metaphor. And it was largely a US thing. It was very, very big in the US before the war. And Campbell's Soup Company were presented a media plan. And on that media plan was what Campbell said was a working class magazine. And people, who are working class, they're not going to use Campbell's soup. Who's going to pay 10 cents for a tin of soup when they could make it themselves? And Charles Coolidge Parlin, who was the researcher for the media company, he proved them wrong. He went into dustbins. So this may be the first evidence of a dustbin audit. He actually went into dustbins and sampled from different areas. And he found, of course, that the poor people did have Campbell's soup tins in their dustbins, and the rich people didn't, because the rich people had it. We don't need to go into the rest of the story. But he used a survey of dustbins to prove his point and bring a better media answer to his client. And Daniel Starch, you've all heard of Starch. He was a real person. He did exist. It isn't the sort of thing that makes your collars stiff. They used to approach people on the street, ask them if they'd read publication and if they remembered any ads within it. Then they used to go back, compare that with the number of people who they knew had read the magazines, and figure out how effective the ads were. Simpler times, but it's the same basic. Can you get him to shut up, does that say? No. Simpler times, but the basics are the same. And just to continue the link with advertising, one of the first agencies in the UK was BMRB, which was opened by J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency. Now, so a little bit about, I think, echoing what Jane was saying, really, the kind of perils of reception. Ipsos Mori do a fabulous series called The Perils of Perception, and it's all published, and you can go and find it online, as indeed I did. And there is, as Jane said, there's no shortage of opinion. You can find out whatever you want to think by going on social media, putting on the Today programme, whatever it may be. But I think we need to be careful where we pick up our knowledge from. So, 64% of people think we trust politicians less than we did 30 years ago. Whew, pretty credible, that, isn't it? Well, actually, if you look at long-term trend data, you'll see in 2017, 17% of us trusted it, and in 1983, 18% trusted it. So, actually, things aren't changing as much as we think they are. We haven't trusted politicians for quite a long time. And I was at Henley shortly after this, and it's a long-term trend. So there's lots of this. And I know it's a little bit surreal, because you're doing a survey on a survey, so it's a bit, Ogilvy, we don't know what we think until we say it. But remember, surveys don't just ask people what they think, they also can survey behaviours and incidences of things. So, if you ask people, they think almost, 1 in 5 teenage girls gets pregnant. We think 1/4 of us have got diabetes, and 1/3 of people in jail are immigrants, Imagine that. It must be Daily Mail, probably. And then, actually, balance that off, 1.4% of teenage girls, 5% diabetes, 12% of people in prison are immigrants. Get some surveys in, get some facts into this business. It's not difficult. I always think sometime you've got to mention sex, haven't you? Because somebody might have fallen asleep and you want to wake them up with sex. And so when you ask in a general survey, how often do you think 18 to 29-year-olds are having sex every 4 weeks? Well, we think men are doing it 14 times and women are doing it 17 times. Not bad, eh? Bad news. The survey says men are doing it 5 times and women are doing it 5 times, which A, sounds a lot more credible, but B, also, to me, rather more logical. But maybe that's just my old-fashioned way of looking at things. But you kind of get the hang of it, What we think's going on isn't always exactly what's going on. For example, again, the Great Resignation. I don't know these people, I don't know this survey, but I just liked the way it explains the point. If you look at 2020, the depth of lockdown, 17% of people are talking about leaving their job in the next 2 years. After lockdown, it went to 3. So our feeling, our experience is that it's gone up by 50%. It's just terrible, it's dreadful. But actually, if you look back and you say what was happening before lockdown, actually it was 23%. So it's gone up a bit, but it feels like it's gone up 50% because we remember recent history more than the long term. We need the survey to make us look at the long term and understand what's really going on. Well, we can't trust ourselves, but surely we can trust Google. Google flu trends. I don't know if you remember Google flu trends. They used to use their data, collect it, and then analyze with one of these clever algorithm thingies and predict how big the flu season was going to be. And it was all going very well until 2013, when they over-predicted by 140%. Now, I don't know why. I'm not even sure Google know why. But I love Wikipedia. There's a great quote in Wikipedia that says, when Google quietly euthanized the program called Google Flu Trends, it turned the poster child of big data into the poster child of the foibles of big data. So again, it's a data source, it's interesting, but you can't rely on it for absolutely everything. So what did we do? Well, of course what we did is we had a survey, and Imperial College, Mori got together and did a marvellous survey to tell us how many people have really got COVID. And surveys, I had a wardrobe fitted. I'll be asked how many points out of 10 do I want to recommend. I'm sure after this conference we'll all be asked. And whatever you do, you get asked this, don't you? It worries me because I think as your unhappy users leave, the NPS goes up, but I don't quite know that. And Albert Einstein said, of course, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So be very careful before you start bonusing your teams on their NPS scores. And, survey research goes absolutely everywhere. Oh, we don't need surveys anymore. We can measure the clicks. Well, not everything's a click, and not everything that's clicking is a human. A lot of people still read newspapers and magazines. A lot of people still watch the telly, go to the cinema, walk past posters. So surveys are absolutely vital for huge amounts of money changing hands in the media world, and we need surveys very much for that. And there's lots of things we couldn't do without surveys. All the segmentation, conjoint stuff I just don't understand and never really did understand. And I know you can use your own data for these, but if you're Tesco, Tesco got a fabulous amount of data, but it's got a filter on it. It's like the walrus. They can't see their non-customers. So, it's all very well, but they need the survey to bring in the non-customers. And, survey data usually looks like this, doesn't it? No great surprises there. And we know this, it's predictable. George Gallup told us that this is what it's going to look like. I suspect that social data looks something like that, and that the positives and the negatives are accentuated, and, and that's good. It's a good thing, because Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns are in there. We didn't know to ask the question, but people are talking about it, so we find out it's an issue. People also talk in their own language. They don't have to answer our questions. You can talk like a teenager. You can talk like a granny. And that's vital to us as well. But remember, it's a relatively small number of people making the most noise and exaggerated by the algorithms. So it's great if you're in research and you've got Cadbury Gorilla, because everybody's talking about Cadbury Gorilla. But if you're selling Petit Filou, trust me, nobody is talking about Petit Filou on social media, so it doesn't tell you anything. So, back to Isaac Newton. It's quantum physics, it's relativity. They're both true, they're just different. And again, I don't know if you've ever come across this. This is David Hockney. And what's interesting about it is it's actually 6 paintings. These are 6 separate panels that put together an absolutely enormous picture. And each of the panels itself is colourful and beautiful and lovely, but it's only when you put the 6 panels together that you see the context, you see the perspective, and you get that rounder understanding of all the bits. And that's another metaphor, by the way, for saying, you've got to look at all the social media and the survey research. It gives you the better picture if you can see it all at once. So our survey of the future. Again, really, apologies, Jane, echoing what you've said, really. It needs to be representative of something. I don't think NatRep is everything, but we have to know what we've sampled if we're going to make any use of the data. It has to be accurate, and high response rates are vital in achieving those 2 things. The checks and everything that the MRS and everybody wants now on data quality, absolutely vital. We can't sell rubbish. And it's got to be in business time, Segmentation, 12 to 20 weeks. Really? Is that real? And we'll give you the advertising tracking data 4 to 6 weeks after your campaign is finished. Really? Really? And, things have changed since I was a lad. We could get away with those things in the 70s. We can't get away with them now. And again, as Jane has pointed, it's all got to pull together. Your survey data has got to go in with the business data, the pest data, the social media. It's all got to go in your data lake or whatever it is that I don't understand again. But you have to be able to pull them out together so you can paint that big Hockney and get a real sense of what's going on. And then I have a final sort of point, and my point is that surveys are for volunteers. Social media, you can get sampled, you can get followed. And I want to quote George Orwell from 1948, from this book, written in 1948. He said, "There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. How often or on what system the thought police plugged in on any individual wire was guesswork. It was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time. But at any rate, they could plug in your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to live, did live, from habit that became instinct, in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and except in darkness, every movement scrutinized." And what we do is we invite people to participate. We're not invading their lives and taking their information. We're saying, please help us to make the world or the product, whatever it is, a slightly better place. So there you go, potted history, a few reminders for somebody, you know, one or two of the slightly olders, a few things we would be well advised to remember, but in a world of fake news and all the nonsense that goes in the Daily Mail, a little bit of real information from surveys, I think, will be playing a vital role for a long time to come. And Australia won the whole series as well, if anybody's worried about it. It absolutely massacred us.
Any questions at all?
Yeah.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for that. So, over your history, what has been the best and the worst innovation that you've seen in survey research?
Ouch. Well, I'll give you the one answer. Online surveys. It's both. Because it means you can do things more quickly, you can get to more people, but you've got to be so much more diligent about what you're getting. You know, when I started out, you would send out field workers and supervisors of those field workers, and you could do back checks on Mrs. Smith of Leicester, and you know, you really kind of knew what was going on. It was very hard work, it was very expensive. So what we've done is we've democratized field work by making it cheaper and more available, but we've left question marks over some of the quality areas.
Thank you, Paul. I have a question, actually. Actually, with your Daily Mirror journalist,
Daily Mirror,
poet
yeah.
You mentioned, about skills. Lots of people you've mentioned in the history of survey research are not what we would think of as survey researchers, indeed insight professionals. Yeah. And you yourself had an advertising background before for research.
No, I was a researcher first of all.
Researcher first,
yeah.
Then an advertiser, advertising sandwich.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. My question's about
with a law degree.
Yeah. With a law wow, I didn't know that. My question's about skills, and what kind of skills you think make a good survey researcher, and what should we be looking out for when we're building teams and thinking about these lessons from the past.
Okay, gosh. I think probably people in this room take numeracy for granted in a way that I don't think you can do. I think you really have to look at numeracy and make sure that you've got some real basic hygiene there. But the thing that really I kind of always say is curiosity. And that's what drove the guys at Mass Observation. It's what drove George Gallup. It's what drove Parlin. All of these people were curious to find out more. I mean, even Booth and Rowntree, with their mission, were curious to find things out. And I think if you don't have that drive to, and you know what, it really at heart it's being a bit nosy, you know. And that there's nothing wrong with being a bit nosy if you want to get into insights, because it means you want to not just accept what's on the surface, but you want to just get a bit deeper, push a bit harder, ask a few more questions, and listen very, very carefully. So mathematics and curiosity, I think, probably would be my impossible balance to offer for candidates.
Thank you. Hi, Paul. Good to see you again.
How can you make me sound old with just one comment? Thank you, Martin.
There was a study by the Royal Statistical Society of MPs to check their numeracy. I don't know if you saw that in your research for that, but it's really worth a look. But 50% of them were unable to answer a really simple probability question. So I suppose the question to you, or maybe to everyone in the room, is that if we as researchers need to be numerate, and clearly we do, the audience for that research needs to be able to understand what it is that we're saying as well. And so it's not just us to tell a better story, but if the audience can't, and it's well worth looking at because it is not a difficult question, and maybe we should all do it, and if anyone fails, we should leave the room. But so the question is not just about us, but how do we then translate what we do to clearly an innumerate audience?
I think we have to accept that that's what we've got. And I think Jane again made the point that it's about the way we tell them. And I think we have to find ways of translating the stuff. And we have to build the trust in us that we are saying, you know, they're not going to want to look at the probability. They're not going to want to look at how many stars there were on the ANOVA. That's not of any interest to these people. They want to become honest. And it can be done. And I know how easy it is. If you're a qualitative researcher, the chances are you have a regular meeting with the chief executive, because he understands what you're talking about. Well, I spoke to these people, and what they said was, and you know, and I think it's incumbent on us to translate what we do to language that they can use, rather than hope that MPs will ever understand probability, because you know, I despair of them understanding anything, let alone probability. So it's our job, I think, to turn that into, you know, useful stuff.
Do we have 2 minutes just for a quick question, JT? Yeah. Could you tell us a bit more about the archive, please, and what you need from us? In order
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. Archive Market Social Reserve, amsr.org.uk, and it is genuinely just collecting the history of the industry, of our industry. So it's mostly at the moment post-Second World War. It's mostly UK-oriented. It may not be like that forever. And it really is. If you've got stuff lying around that you're ready to throw out, whether it be digital, whether it be on paper, they've got a team of fantastic volunteers up at Harrow, Ipsos's offices in Harrow, scanning stuff in. So, you know, whether it be a whole book or it be reports, if it's confidential and there's client confidentiality issues, things can be stored but embargoed. So these aren't allowed to come out for 20 years. So anything that you've got that is old, that is about our industry, either very specific or very general, the archive would love to hear from you. And as I say, if you know, it costs something like 40,000 a year because they're storing the stuff as well as downloading it. So any contributions, sponsorship is gratefully received. But time also, if you've got time to help with the marketing of it, with the scanning of it, anything like that, the AMSR would love to hear from you. Thank you. There usually is, yeah. They're very good at organising people like Paddy Barwise, who's the chairman, and they'll wheel out, what's the psephologist? Curtis. They'll wheel out Curtis. They'll wheel out Rory Sutherland. So they'll get a name to come and do a piece, and it'll be, you know, a small group of ancients in the room and a large group of interested people watching online.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So the third session before we break is from the fantastic Mike Stevens, who is founder and CEO of Insight Platforms and What Next Strategy, if I remember correctly. Thank you. Insight Platforms with an S on the end of it. I have to get it right. Mike started his career at Simpson Carpenter. Is that right? No? Where were you before?
No, that was it. That was it. That was a 6-month career mistake.
Oh, right. He briefly went to Simpson Carpenter before having a much longer time at Vision Critical. I'd double check your LinkedIn. Insight Platforms is an absolutely awesome website. Not just saying that because he's here. It truly is where I go to find out about new technology vendors across the whole research spectrum. Fantastic newsletters and training. If you've not visited, please have a look. Mike's here today to share a bit more about his views on the future of surveys, 10 changes for us to prepare for over the coming years. So without further ado, welcome Mike, please.
Yeah. Thanks, JT. Right, oh, you don't know this, that's my face, those are the two businesses I do. One is a consultancy, one is a website, as JT said. Yes, I've worked in a lot of places, the briefest of which was that company you mentioned, which wasn't the greatest of experiences. Anyway, can anybody tell me what this is? No? This? Anybody? No, it's a wavy red line, which represents the collapse in the share price of Qualtrics over the last 6 months, or year to date. So, it's actually gone down another 7% since this. So, anybody from Qualtrics in the room? No. Okay. Good. Let's talk about them. Right. Okay. Clearly, surveys are dead. Actually, Microsoft's dropped 25%, Salesforce has dropped 40%, so it's not unique to Qualtrics, but there is a narrative that prevails that says surveys are a terrible way to understand people, that, as Paul said, people don't say what they do, they don't tell you what they really think. We have much better ways of understanding how people behave implicitly. Big data is the answer. All of these different sources are far better than asking people, and anyway, surveys are so last year, they're so slow that they don't give you usable information. If that were true, then we probably wouldn't see so many survey platforms, so many tools that are out there. This is almost certainly an underestimate of the number of different technology tools that are there for collecting survey data. Lots of different types of tools. That's not just me, I put that together, but the G2 Crowd, which is a software website, also lists dozens and dozens of survey tools in their database. So, there are lots and lots of categories, lots of ways in which survey data is collected and used, all different applications that exist. These things are growing like crazy. And it's not just the supply of technology and tools, actually the types of people who use surveys, and I don't just mean receive the information passively, I mean get hands-on. All of these different persona types are increasingly using survey technology, using these software tools to do their own research, to generate their own data. And this is it's a massive undercount of the different types of personas that are out there. You've got management consultants, you've got UX research people, you've got people in customer service, customer experience. Everybody is using survey tools and data to inform their decision making. And the costs of this is a technology issue broadly. We find deflationary impacts across the board. But the latest data that I've got is this SMR pricing study from a couple of years ago. But over the space of 8 years, the average cost globally of an online U&A study, this is not about transitioning from offline to online, this is about online to online over 8 years, dropped by 2/3. So it would have cost you $27,000 in 2010. It will now cost you about $9,000. Okay, that is data that SMR collects. None of these data sources are perfect, as we saw, as Alex Owens referenced, but it gives you an idea. Surveys are not dying, long-lived surveys. So what I'm going to talk about, I think I've probably got far too much to fit into my allotted time, but 10 trends for where this is going, largely driven by a kind of technology and new methodology angle. And I want to talk about some of the stuff that's happening and the implications going forward. First of which, rather gratifyingly, was foreshadowed by the two previous speakers about integration. On a technical level, this means all sorts of different things. So integrating between survey data collection and panels, being able to very, very quickly get the people to take your surveys. But also, I wish I hadn't put so many builds in this slide, the combination of survey feedback, asking people questions, we see a lot of limitations. That, we have to acknowledge that people forget stuff. They have bias in their responses. There's all sorts of different types of bias that inform the way that survey data is collected and puts limitations on it. Behavioral data also has a bucket load of limitations in you don't really know anything about the people, you don't know the context of use, you don't know a lot of the kind of the why stuff that we saw earlier as to what's going on. You put those two things together, you start to get a better blended picture of what's going on. So in the US, this business that Kantar bought recently, Numerator, fantastic example with shopper and consumer panels, and the ability to document exactly what people are buying online, in store, through receipt scanning, and ask them questions to be able to understand in the round. A lot more of these types of, combining behavioural and survey data feedback. Accompanying this, a lot more use of behavioural tracking, passive tracking connected to survey data and panels. This is just one example, measure protocol that, with people's permission, understands their search behaviour online, understands their app usage and so on, and can ask targeted questions. So you get a much richer picture. Salesforce is becoming, the dominant CRM platform, the spine into which other applications connect. This is the Salesforce App Exchange with hundreds of applications, millions of companies connecting all their data together. And it's becoming a bit of a default for survey tools to be able to connect into a Salesforce environment. So, Question Pro, lots and lots of different survey tools have this out of the box, so you can connect what people say to what you know about them from their profiles and records. Qualtrics is actually, for all the mean things I might want to say, is one of the big innovators in this kind of marketplace philosophy, connecting lots and lots of different tools together into one place. So you've got survey data integrated with lots of third-party, both research tools and also other behavioral data sources. Fuel Cycle, not very big in the European market, very big in the US, is one of the innovators in trying to create this research marketplace that joins up lots of other types of research tools into a kind of backbone of research data. So there's a lot going on there around integration in different angles, into systems of record, in businesses, between different types of data, and obviously in the workflow that exists between survey tools and the data sources that we use. Right, that really is 1 of 10, sorry. Okay, so the next one is about embedding surveys. This is partly about the integration, but really it's about people in lots of different types of roles in organizations using survey data as part of their workflow. So, what used to be a customer satisfaction survey run by researchers is now democratized as customer experience management, run by people who don't have much research background in a lot of cases, often from a customer support, customer management parts of organizations. But it's people in their native roles. It's not specialist researchers who are doing this. You think about the way that panels and communities have been adopted. You've got a lot of people in marketing roles, in a lot of these are in-house research teams and insight teams, but you've got this proliferation of in-house tools that are mechanisms for surveying and communicating with customers. And then you've got things like product management, and by which I mean digital platforms, so people who are responsible for overseeing the technical building, the design, the user needs to create apps or websites and services. You've got tools like User Biller for instant feedback on websites. These tools are not really on the radar of many researchers. They have fundamental survey capabilities. So something like User Biller is you embed it in an app or something. But something like Pendo is a tool that gives you all sorts of analytics about where did people click, when did they join, how long did they stay, has the ability to survey people right in the app. So you've got people who've probably done anything about survey design or research using survey tools to connect it with data, event-driven data from their applications and so on. Hotjar is an interesting one. Actually, if you look at their website, they've recently revamped it, and they've got 2 products. One is, I think they call it Observe, and the other is Ask. Very explicitly bringing that stuff together. The Observe is how do people behave in our app, the heat maps, the scroll maps, all of that stuff that analysts look at. And then you've got Ask, which might be NPS, but it might also be, hey, why did you come to the site today? What's going on? You put all that stuff together, but it's being used by people in these product management roles. So it's a different way of embedding surveys into organizations. Third one is about simplicity, and I'm a big fan of keeping things simple. I'm actually not a qualified researcher on any level, so but we know from the psychology, from the behavioural work, that if you're overwhelmed by choices, if you've got too many things to click, you've got too many options, it just leads to kind of cognitive brain fog. So you limit choices, you make things simpler. You see this in the visual design as well as the way that the choice architectures work. And you see this in these micro-survey platforms. Google Surveys was one of the first. They started with this. You can ask one question. Now you can ask 10. There are lots of other micro-survey platforms out there now. So something like OnePulse is, you can ask 3 questions in one survey, and that's it. But it's growing like crazy because sometimes that's all you need. And if you focus on very, very specific requirements and you don't bloat out with a 20-minute survey, you can often get the data that you need, and very quickly, often in real time, or near real time. Sprig, this is, again, mostly focused on designers, UX researchers, and product managers. A micro-survey platform with all, you can see, it communicates simplicity. It's all about, I don't need to be scared about creating this survey. I can just do it. I pull down a template. I want to ask this. Bosh, off you go. Again, 3-second, three question type surveys. Even people like SurveyMonkey, they have these, templated frameworks for people who may not be experts in brand research or, advertising. Template-driven approaches are becoming much, much more standardized now, and it's democratizing the way in which survey data is used. A test. So, anybody here from a test? No, I love them. Okay, so they are a customer and a previous client. They're great people. But $100 million in funding, a survey platform that has 6 options, okay? So it is phenomenally basic as a survey capability. And in fact, it's a bit of a hedging the bet to put NPS as a question type, because really it's just 2 questions based on 2 other questions. So let's say it's 5 questions. $100 million in funding, lots and lots of profile, and have been doing very, very well avoiding professional researchers. So they've targeted marketing people, they've targeted digital growth people who want consumer intelligence. They don't talk about surveys, they don't really talk about research. It's about understanding users and getting feedback. So the simplicity framing of a lot of this survey technology is a very important trend. Upside, Canadian company, again, very, very simple approach to concept testing. For years we've been piling in more of the diagnostics and the, extending all of these, fabulous predictive things from Bases, from the companies that we used to work for, from what do they call it, Evaluate, from the Kantar product. This is a swipe left, swipe right. It's a Tinder application. They've done a shed load of comparative work, of research on research, looking at, in fact, brands have done it. Some of the big consumer goods brands have looked at their past catalogue. They've redone a whole load of work, and they've said, actually, the data gives us exactly the same amount of decision power as a lot of these, heavy long-term concept testing surveys. So literally, left or right, do you want it or not? So very, very simple, and increasingly showing as much predictive power if you do it right as some of the more sophisticated methods. Contextual, what was this one about? Right, yes. So this is about not showing something in isolation in a darkened room and go, will you buy it? Will you, do you like this ad? It's about embedding the experience in the native environment. So, something like Zappy that has, uses Lumen's eye tracking tools with a mock-up environment of a Facebook ad. So you're actually seeing a lot of this stuff in context. The principles have been there for years. We've tested clutter reels for ads. Now, with all of these digital platforms, much more important to get feedback in context, in situ. HotSpecs, which is another Canadian company, quite busy in Canada, which is does a lot of behavioural science-led research, has all of these mock-up environments for testing stuff in YouTube, in mock-up e-commerce environments for Alibaba or Amazon, to get much better insight through the survey research that's grounded in the real experience. Element Human, some of you may know, is an AI business that combines eye tracking with facial coding with implicit measurement for understanding media response, embeds that in a survey, and has used it extensively in these mock-up environments. So you get this survey feedback, you get emotion recognition and eye tracking and attention data, all inside a mock-up TikTok feed or Instagram feed for very targeted understanding of how will ad perform, how does the influencer, where they do a lot of work there, impact the way in which decisions are made by the followers and so on. So, contextualizing surveys are going to be a big part of the way that things go. Good looking, yes, of course. Derek Zoolander obviously tells us the importance of this stuff, but, it used to be you looked at surveys that were transferred from traditional ways of doing things on paper, the way that we put them online, and oh my God, they were hideous. They're, just grids, things off screen, scroll, terrible, fonts, interfaces. Typeform is one of the ones that's actually, innovated a lot in the interface and tried to make proper digital native experiences for survey research. And a lot of, similar businesses. So Survey Sparrow, another growing business, Indian company that, you can see the design, the ability to customize the designs, the layouts, the colors, the branding, all of that, a lot of the research purists would say, oh my God, what impact does this have on response level? Most people are going, just give me something that I can do, easily and quickly and intuitively. People don't read stuff. They like to have, a good digital experience. Even SurveyMonkey's on board with, trying to brand things, design things in a way that's kind of aesthetically engaging. So there's a lot more going on the design side of things, to make the survey taking experience a little bit less onerous. This is going to be big, okay? So conversational surveys and, that using AI to combine the way in which people interact is going to be really big. There are some different flavors of this. So Rival Technologies is really a kind of Gen Z targeted research business that embeds surveys in a messaging interface. There's not really a lot of AI going on, but it makes people feel that that they're having more of a kind of native experience. And there are quite a lot of companies like this. This is another Survey Sparrow. It's a conversational survey. To be honest, it's just like any other survey with routing and branching. It's not really intelligent. It just looks like a messaging app. Where things start to get really interesting is where a good mate of mine, Phil Sutcliffe, has just started working. Inca is one of 3 or 4 companies that have genuinely conversational interfaces for surveys. So, there is some programming at the start, but the AI can be trained to be much more probing, can respond to the answers that people give, can dig into to follow up. Some really great stuff here. They've been doing some research on research that says we get far richer verbatim feedback. The feedback people give at the end of the surveys is, it was like kind of chatting to someone. They personify the bot in a lot of ways. There's a lot of bad ways to do this. You've seen some terrible examples of, and it's great to game, the kind of customer service bots that you get on websites. But this is, there's a lot of new ground being broken in this kind of conversational survey space. It's not just about in-feed messaging. You can do some quite creative things with, with brand mapping. It's not just restricted to, to text-based answers. And this is, so Feedback Avatars is a very small company based out of New Zealand, but I think we'll start to see more of this. There's a platform called Digital Humans, and this is, I think they call it Miri. It's the same technology you've just seen for Inca on the background, which is chatbot based driven, but with a human avatar front end, and having much more kind of conversational engagement for people taking surveys. And there's a small business in South Africa, actually a couple of ex-Kantar people, Hello Ara, and they have a lot of different characters for their bots where they've started playing with this digital human stuff. People really engage, in the same way that you might swear at Siri or Alexa. We're all personifying these inanimate bot objects, but increasingly survey research is going to go that route where you start to bridge the gap that we've had between in-person interviewing, once it was phased out as being too expensive other than niches, and the ability to do it at scale online. Hybrid, this is about qual and quant coming together. Some of these things overlap, the conversational survey stuff, very much in that space. But we've seen a lot of evolution of survey platforms to add in, more creative testing things, whether it's for kind of ads or positioning. So, tag things. This is from the Forster Decipher legacy platform, where you can tag things, you can comment, you can hotspot, and integrate that into a survey. Things that historically would have been focus group activities, qualitative behaviors, and something like Remesh. A lot of people will know. It's pitched as qualitative. To be honest, they can have a focus group of up to 5,000 people. To me, this is surveys with unstructured feedback. So it's a hybrid environment of combining qualitative and quantitative inputs. Audio visual, which makes me sound a little bit 1980s. Sorry about that. But increasingly using not just about testing media and visual creative assets in this way. It's also and there are survey platforms. This is from Confirm It. You can see where people responded, embedding audio and video files. The interesting evolution, I think, for the future is opening up the feedback channel so that people can just speak their survey response. People can talk their survey response. So Phonic is one of these platforms that started as an audio surveys thing. The AI transcribes it, analyzes it, picks out, you've got the audio file, you've got the sentiment, you've got all of the kind of text analytics that go with it. VoxPopMe, one of the kind of higher profile for the video feedback based surveys. Lots of companies that have kind of cloned that approach over the years. And this is kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit, but and we have to be careful about believing where this is going to go. But respondentless surveys. Wouldn't it be great if we could just do surveys without having to speak to people? Well, there are quite a lot of innovations around different related areas. So you think about eye tracking. You've got you've got the ability to track where the pupil's looking. You've got gaze plots and so on. People have taken historical eye tracking studies, trained AI models to say, we don't need to collect fresh data. We can predict, if you've got a red button, if you've got an attractive human, people are going to look at the face, people are going to look at the different colors. And they've modeled it. So Dragonfly, there are a number of companies like this. This is all predictive eye tracking that says, we can tell you based on your design, your uploaded design, it's a web page, it's a poster, it's an ad, whatever it is, we'll tell you where the eye tracking would be right. And some of these companies make very bold claims to say, we are at 90% consistent with real life eye tracking. If you take that logic further, Gastrograph is sort of startup business in the US that has the world's largest sensory research data set. So all of these kind of super tasters, all of these in-hall tasting new food and beverage products all over the world. They've trained their AI models to say, actually, once we've got a new flavor profile, we can predict how people are going to respond to it. We don't need to go and do expensive sensory research in venue every time. So, these are ways of effectively engineering out the respondents from primary research. Zappy has this digital ad predictor. You can do it for free. I uploaded that fantastic Guardian advert from the 80s with the you might not have seen it. It's the full perspective point of view, yeah. To be fair, it said it was a good ad, so at least that. But they've trained it on all of the stuff that they've done, and obviously the biggest data set that exists in ad testing is all of the history of the Milner-Brown link test, 200,000 link tests that they've done at Kantar. This is a demo that you can watch on my website. But it's the link AI in the Kantar marketplace that is effectively saying, look, we can tell you reasonably accurately how successful your ad is going to be based on these historical precedents. There are this is another recent startup which again is doing predictive creative tests without the need to gather fresh data. So David, again, trained on lots and lots of historical success rates for video-based media, can tell you by breaking down all these components using computer vision, using even the music, tell you, the most likely impact of your ad without needing to ask people. And there is a small company. I expect we'll start to see more of these. I also expect there's going to be a load of Google Flu Trends nonsense about mispredictions and terrible estimates. But in this another Canadian business, Persona Panels, is doing exactly this with virtualizing respondent groups. So, you'll say, what are the characteristics of your target audience, and then building virtual panelists. You send them out into the world and see these bots interact, and then you can ask them questions. You can test your concepts against these virtual panelists. So, the idea that we might actually be doing surveys without people answering them is, I don't know, terrifying, inspiring, bit of both ideas at the same time. Right, okay, I'm going to end with a quiz. Did I make it? Right. Sorry for the slightly breathless thing, I thought I had longer. Anybody tell me what these 3 items have in common? Right, a horse's arse, big metal boxes, a tower block in West London, in Gunnersbury. Really? Chiswick, tower block. Okay, I'll horse's arse. 2 of those was the standard width of a Roman chariot, which actually, when you look today and you look at all the evolutions of chariots, and is the standard rail gauge for for railways in Europe. So standardization from the Roman Empire has actually persisted to this day. Containerization transformed global trade by systematizing, standardizing against a set of norms. This is the British Standards Institute building in Chiswick. Anyway, the point is standards. If you do a survey today in one platform, being able to make sense of that data, if you've connected lots of, in other platforms, you've done a Qualtrics, you've done a Confirm It, you've done Snap surveys, putting all that data together is a challenge. But the future is going to be interoperable. And he's not even watching. He's in the back of the room, he's not even looking. Right, okay. What I'm saying is interoperability between all these different survey tools is going to be an important part of the future story. And Matt's fantastic new innovation and work that Tim have done around the API for transferring survey data between disparate survey tools to create that standardization. It's actually pretty shocking how balkanized and siloed the survey industry is across these platforms. So it's actually incredibly important work that's been done to start to bring these things together. Is that it? Yeah, okay. That's me done. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me there?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in and say thank you so much for promoting TS API. Sorry, yeah. And we've had a big question from the live stream, but I'm going to try and paraphrase it. You've been speaking about, we're talking about speaking our survey responses and other ways. What about thinking our survey responses? There's been big steps in neurotechnology recently, very liberating for many people. Have you seen any early movements from our world in the area of neurotechnology? And if not, do you think we ever will?
Yes, in that there is a lot of work that is connecting, EEG signals and feedback, even intuitive or kind of non-conscious feedback from sweat responses, galvanic skin response, from measuring pulse rates, heart rate response, and combining that with survey measures as a substitute. I think we're a long, long way from what's the Neuralink, Elon Musk kind of madness thing. I just don't think that's in any way in our lifetime as an alternative to people expressing themselves. But as a combination of data streams, then yes, that is quite an interesting area.
Thank you.
Hi, that was terrific, thank you. It's market research, Jim, but not as we know it. I'm struggling to see this in the context of the market research industry, the standard market research industry. Those innovations, have any of them come from market researchers?
Yeah.
Yes?
100%, yeah.
That's good.
Lots of them. So, Inca, the conversational survey tool, for instance, is being used for, what you and I would recognise as traditional research applications. So for testing ads, for understanding, predicting concept response, it just adds a layer of additional depth and explanatory power. So there's a lot of those things are genuinely grounded in, research expertise that we'd understand in the kind of, agency, qualified people, knowledgeable client paradigm as well. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're perfectly on time. Thank you very much. Mike, are you around for a little bit to take questions here? He is, so any more questions for Mike, please let him know. It's now time for teas, coffees, refreshments. Bathrooms are out in the main corridor. Teas and coffees in the back right. Please be back promptly for 11:30. A big thank you to Jane, Paul and Mike for our first session. Thanks, guys.